Hey friends, welcome back to the Lifestyle School podcast. I am your host, Hope Plack, and I want to welcome everyone who is watching on video this week. Last week was actually our first time ever on video, and I know it was far from perfect. I made some mistakes, but I'm learning, so be patient with me as I figure out this whole recording audio thing. I don't think of myself as a very techie person, but also what was funny about last week is I went through and clipped some pieces of the episode for the social media, and there's nothing like watching yourself back and realizing some bad habits that you have. I realized that I was saying right after every sentence, and so everyone who's listened to the last 79 episodes, I just want to sincerely apologize and say, I'm sorry, I'm learning, and I'm going to try to speak more eloquently on the podcast. So with that, let's get into a little life update, because I realized last week in my excitement for doing a video recording, I didn't give you guys any update. It had been a couple of weeks because I had been out of town, but I wanted to tell you that I am officially down, I think about 17 and a half pounds. I was like, I didn't write it down. About 17 and a half pounds as of this morning, which is really exciting. I'm finally below 200 pounds, which is something I was hoping to reach by the end of June, which was my birthday, but it came and went and it didn't happen, and that's okay. What does matter is that like every day I have just continued to show up for myself, do my fast, get my exercise in, walk, try to get a lot of sleep, and I can tell that what I'm doing is working, and I know that it's working, so I'm just, trusting this process. Also, as of this week, I'm 6 months postpartum, which is very exciting in some ways. Also, I'm like, sweet little baby Josiah, don't grow up. You're growing up too fast. He's always been obsessed with his bouncer, but he is like log rolling across the floor. He is going to be on the move before I know it. He's like almost sitting up unassisted. I am just not ready. My oldest is 9, almost 10, and it's really been hitting me. I think just how fast this process goes with kids. Like they say babies don't keep, and truer words have never been spoken. And so I'm just like, please, Josiah, like sleep through the night, but don't grow up too fast, love-hate relationship with them getting a little bit older. Also a fun, exciting announcement. If you follow me on social media, you'll have seen that you guys, I graduated from my super fat pants to my fat pants. This past weekend, I wore them for the first time, and that was so exciting. A little backstory there. So I had Josiah in January. I have saved postpartum clothes from previous pregnancies, and I went to put those postpartum jeans on, and what do you know? They didn't fit. Like I couldn't even get them barely up above my knees. It was very depressing in the moment. I was spiraling a little bit. I don't know. I was so sleep deprived. All of it was a lot. And so I went out and I was like, I need to have a pair of jeans that fit. So I got a pair of jeans. They were like a little snug around the waist, but it was like, I had a baby 6 weeks ago. I'm going to, everything is going to start tightening up. I'm going to lose some of this baby weight, just naturally. And what do you know, 2 weeks later, I'm like, I can't wear these jeans. They're too tight. They're so uncomfortable. And I stepped on the scale and I had gained almost like 10 pounds. I was almost up to the weight that I was at like a couple days before I gave birth. And that was really, really depressing. It just led to more mental spiraling, if I'm being totally real with you guys. And so it was like, well, I guess I'm just going to have to go buy another pair of jeans in a bigger size, because a girl needs to have a pair of pants that's not sweatpants to leave the house in. So that's what we did. And I'm just really, really excited. I was hoping that these pants, it would be just like a month or two, and then I'd be out of them. But it's been a hot minute. It's now the middle of July, and I'm just graduating to my fat pants. And all that to say, it's a journey, right? I don't put like the pregnancy, birth, postpartum period will humble you if you have any sort of pride. And I am feeling that. So let's see here. What else? One last personal update. I have had a really bad back flare up this last week or so. It started when I was in Minnesota a week and a half ago. well, it started even before that. I think I just wore my baby on the front in the baby carrier for too many consecutive hours, too many consecutive days. Currently, I'm in a really bad back flare up. And I think anytime you're in pain, it like really helps you evaluate just your life in general. And so what I will say about that is, what I have realized is, so about 4 years ago, I had my first really bad back flare up. I've been dealing with these back issues for about 5 years, and I've done everything: chiropractic care, massage, PT, core rehab, all the things, and imaging. And we don't know what the problem is. We have some suspicions, but what has been interesting about this process, and I've been really trying to do like this internal work, on my weight loss journey, is that in this flare, I have been able to find gratitude because I had to like sit down on the shower floor to shave my legs the other day. And it was like really painful to do that. And I had this memory of 4 years ago having to do that and just being so distraught about like how much pain I was in. And it like flashed me back to that. I didn't even remember that. And what it did for me in that moment is I was like, wow, I am so thankful that these last like 4 years, I have not been living at this level of pain. I have been living with a level of pain, but like finding the thankful, like, wow, there's so much I can be thankful for in this moment. My life is far from perfect, especially when it comes to this back stuff. It's super frustrating. I've had to modify a lot of my life, but to be able to find the gratitude in that moment, I feel like was really a big step for me, because this has been just like overall a hard thing. So anyway, that is my life update. We got a really great episode for you guys today. But before we get into it, as always, a quick reminder: this podcast is for educational purposes only, and it's not intended as medical advice. So as always, consult with your healthcare provider before making any major changes to your diet, fasting routines, supplements, exercise, etc. And if you enjoyed this episode, if you could share it with a friend, leave a review, subscribe to the podcast, go ahead and follow me over on Instagram or Facebook at Hope Coaching. That is a really amazing way you can support the show, help us get the word out about these conversations that we're having, especially if you found them transformative. And then last thing, our supplement store is open. So if you've been wanting high quality supplements that you can actually trust, you know where to get them. Every product in the store is third-party tested for quality and purity. Unfortunately, that's not something that you can be guaranteed when you're buying supplements on a place like Amazon or grabbing them at your local health food store. These are the same professional grade supplements that I use, I recommend to my clients, and it's a really easy way to support what we're doing here at the Lifestyle School Podcast, so that I can continue to make this free content. So if you want to support the show in that way, if you're already buying supplements, head over to my website, www.hopecoaching.com. You're going to need, on the top right corner, you'll see a button that says store. Click that. It'll take you to the supplement store. On checkout, you are going to have to create an account, and you're going to need a product, like a code, to create an account, because not just anyone can create an account. You guys know, that code is 104567. Again, that code is 104567. I did just realize this last week, I think it's a millennial thing to repeat a code twice, because that's what we used to do for our phone numbers when we would leave a voicemail. Anyway, I digress. You can order supplements there. If you are like, I want to start taking some supplements, Hope, I'm not sure though what I need, head over to episode 43 of the Lifestyle School Podcast. And in that podcast, I go over like my core 4 supplement recommendations for metabolic health and why they matter. So with that, you guys, excuse me, I feel like I have to do something here. I'm sorry. That was not good. With that, you guys, let's dive into today's episode. I'm really excited about it. Also, one thing that I want to mention, I'm using a totally new setup for recording this. And so bear with me if we're stumbling through parts of this. So one of the things that I say all the time when it comes to weight loss is that my goal isn't just to help someone lose 20, 50, or even 100 pounds. My goal is to help them build a body that actually wants to be healthy, a body where hunger isn't running the show, a body where, a body that can burn fat that's been stored. And I want them to build a body that has stable energy, stable blood sugar, and a stable mood. Because when these things improve, weight loss becomes the natural byproduct rather than this constant uphill battle. And we know how much of an uphill battle weight loss can feel like, right? So today's episode is really focusing on the foundation of everything I teach here at the Lifestyle School podcast, as well as in my course, the Lifestyle School for Weight Loss course. In fact, if someone asked me, where should I start on my weight loss journey? This is probably the conversation I would want them to hear first, because I think one of the biggest mistakes people make is believing that weight loss should be the first goal. And, now I know that probably maybe sounds strange coming from someone who spends her days helping people lose weight, but hear me out. I don't believe weight loss should be the first target. I believe metabolic health should be the first target. Because when your metabolism becomes healthier, your body becomes better at doing the very thing you're trying to desperately force it to do, which is burn stored body fat. Unfortunately, though, that's not how most of us were taught to think about weight loss. We've been told that our entire lives that losing weight is nothing more than a math equation. Eat less, move more, count your calories, burn more than you consume, and if you're not losing weight, well, you just aren't disciplined enough, or maybe you're not counting everything you're actually eating. You're cheating on your tracking. You need more motivation. Ultimately, you need to try harder. You need to push through that crazy hunger you're feeling. You have to have more self-control. And can I just say, I think that's one of the most discouraging messages that we've ever given people, because if you've ever tried to lose weight, you're probably discovered something that doesn't fit the narrative, is that you start your diet, you feel super motivated, you meal prep, you weigh your food, you download the calorie tracking app, you tell yourself this time it's going to be different, right? We've all been there at the beginning of the year or after we've had a baby and we're ready to start losing the baby weight. And maybe for a few weeks it is, right? The scale starts moving, we're excited, we're like throttled, and you think we have finally figured this out. But then something changes. We've been there. The weight loss slows. You start feeling hungrier. The cravings come back stronger than before. You're thinking about food 24/7. Your energy drops. You start to feel cold. Those workouts don't feel quite as energized or good. And eventually you find yourself eating more than you planned. And almost overnight, it feels like all of your progress has disappeared. We've all been there. And because we've been taught that weight loss is simply about eating less, we naturally assume that the problem must be us. I just don't have enough willpower. I wasn't disciplined enough. I failed. But what if that's not what happened at all? What if your body was simply doing exactly what it was designed to do? What if the problem wasn't that you were weak or lacking motivation? What if the problem was that no one ever taught you how your metabolism actually works? Because excuse me, here is something I wish everyone understood. Your body is incredibly intelligent. It isn't trying to make you overweight. It isn't trying to sabotage you. It's not broken. It's adapting, right? Every single day, your body is making thousands of decisions without you even realizing it. It's deciding how much energy to burn, how hungry you should feel, whether to store energy, whether to release that stored energy, how much insulin to produce, whether or not to burn carbohydrates or to burn fat, whether to conserve energy because it thinks food is scarce. There are non-conscious decisions that your body is making, and these decisions are biological ones, which means your body is constantly responding to the signals it's being sent. And that's why I tell my clients that your metabolism isn't a calculator. It is a conversation. Every meal, every snack, every night of poor sleep, every stressful day, every workout, every fast, every decision you make is communicating something to your metabolism. We're either sending your body signals that say, food is constantly available, keep storing energy, or we're sending signals that say, it's okay to release stored energy, it's safe to burn body fat. And this is a very different way of thinking about weight loss. Instead of asking, how do I force my body to lose weight? Begin asking, what signals am I sending my body every single day? And that's where metabolic health comes in, because when your metabolism is functioning well, your blood sugar stays stable, insulin stays under control, your hunger hormones communicate appropriately, your body can easily switch between burning the food you've just eaten and burning the body fat you've already stored. And that's called metabolic flexibility. And it's one of the defining characteristics of metabolic health. But when your metabolism becomes unhealthy, everything changes. Blood sugar becomes unstable, insulin stays elevated, that food noise gets louder, hunger increases, energy crashes become a normal part of your day, cravings become stronger, and perhaps most importantly, your body becomes less efficient at accessing its own fat stores. And think about how frustrating that is. If you have tens of thousands of calories stored on your body, yet your body is still asking you to eat every 2 to 3 hours, this isn't, like a self-discipline or a weakness problem. It's because something isn't working properly. And unfortunately, most weight loss advice completely ignores this. And instead of asking why someone is hungry all the time, we simply tell them to ignore it, right? White knuckle it even harder. Instead of asking why someone has no energy, we tell them to exercise more. And instead of asking someone, who can't stop thinking about food, instead of asking why someone can't stop thinking about food, we tell them to have better self-control. And we're treating the symptoms without addressing the root cause. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons why so many people feel like they're constantly starting over. Now, before we go any further, I want to make something really clear. Calories do matter. And I'm not someone who believes calories don't count. Energy balance absolutely exists on some level, but if we put someone into a laboratory and measure every calorie they consume and every calorie they burn, these numbers would absolutely matter. But here's where I think we've gotten some things really backwards. Calories are not the first lever I want someone pulling when they're trying to lose weight, because your metabolism isn't static. It adapts, it responds, it's dynamic. And if someone has chronically elevated insulin, blood sugar regulation, constant hunger, low energy, or significant insulin resistance, asking them to simply eat less is like asking someone to drive a car with their parking brake on. Can they move forward? Sure, but it's going to require a tremendous amount of effort. It's going to slow them down. It's going to be really frustrating, and eventually something is going to wear out. I would rather we take the parking brake off first, and that's what improving metabolic health does. It removes unnecessary resistance, kind of like we talked about last week. It helps your body do what it's designed to do. And that's why inside of Lifestyle School, we don't begin by asking, how can we get you to eat fewer calories? We begin by asking, how can we help your body function better? That is a key difference, because when your metabolism becomes healthier, everything else becomes easier, not effortless, but easier. And you aren't fighting your biology every single day. You're working alongside it. And honestly, that's what changed everything for me. Many of you know my own story. For years, I struggled to know with what I now know was insulin resistance. I was constantly hungry. I was always thinking about food. I dealt with reactive hypoglycemia, where my blood sugar would crash and I'd feel shaky, anxious, and desperate to eat. I assumed that was just who I was, right? I thought I simply lacked self-control. But when I started addressing my metabolic health instead of obsessing over calories, something incredible happened. My hunger changed, my energy changed, my blood sugar stabilized, and truly for the first time in my life, I wasn't constantly thinking about my next meal, which was, I honestly didn't think it was possible. That was life-changing, and it wasn't because the scale moved, although it eventually did. It was life-changing because I finally felt like my body and I were on the same team. And that's exactly what I want for you. So today we're going to answer 4 really important questions. First, what exactly is metabolic health? 2, How do we know whether your metabolism is healthy? Because our annual lab work actually tells far more than we realize. And third, why do traditional calorie-restricted diets fail so many people? And finally, how do we improve metabolic health so weight loss becomes simpler, more sustainable, and more enjoyable? Because if there's one thing I hope you take away from today's episode, it's this. The goal isn't simply to lose weight. The goal is to build a healthy metabolism, because healthy metabolisms don't just create easier weight loss, they create healthier, more energetic, more resilient people. And in my opinion, humble opinion, that's a goal worth pursuing, right? So let's start with the obvious question. What exactly is metabolic health? So it's one of those terms that's become really popular over the last few years, but I think most people still aren't sure entirely what it means. Give me 1 second, you guys. It is 6:12 in the morning and I have not drank all my coffee. Okay, so what does metabolic health mean? Some people think it's just another way of saying you have a fast metabolism. Others think it means maybe that you're skinny. Some assume, it's only something that diabetics need to worry about, but none of these are actually true. Here's the definition I want you to remember. Metabolic health is your body's ability to efficiently create, store, and use energy. That's really what your metabolism is. Your metabolism isn't just how many calories you burn, it's the collection of thousands of chemical reactions happening inside of your body every single second that keeps you alive. It's your food, it's your body converting food into energy, it's regulating your blood sugar, it's determining whether you'll burn carbohydrates or body fat, it's producing hormones, it's building muscle, repairing tissues, supporting your immune system, keeping your brain functioning, and helping your heart beat another 100,000 times today. Your metabolism isn't just one thing. It's the engine that powers everything your body does, and when that engine is running well, life feels very different than when it isn't. A metabolically healthy person generally has stable blood sugar, healthy insulin levels, good energy throughout the day, hunger that comes at appropriate times, which, newsflash, isn't every 2 hours, the ability to comfortably go several hours without eating, minimal food cravings, healthy cholesterol and triglycerides, healthy blood pressure, and a body that's able to switch back and forth between burning carbohydrates and burning fat depending on what's available. And that last point is incredibly important. So I want to spend a little extra time there. Sorry. That was bad. This is why I try not to drink fluids while I'm recording. Anyway, I digress. We're learning, guys. We're in this together. But I want to spend a little extra time there, and because this is something called metabolic flexibility, which I know you've heard me talk about before. Think about a hybrid car. A hybrid can run on gasoline. It can also run on electricity. It simply switches between two fuel sources depending on what's available and what's efficient. And our body was designed to work the exact same way. After you eat a meal, especially one containing carbohydrates, your body will primarily burn glucose, and that makes sense. You just provided your body with a fresh source of fuel. But several hours later, when that meal has been digested, your body should naturally begin to burn stored fat instead. So your body's going back and forth, back and forth. It's constantly switching fuel sources throughout the day. And that is metabolic flexibility. It's one of the reasons our ancestors survived, right? Because there weren't refrigerators, there weren't convenience stores, there weren't protein bars in the glove compartment. Sometimes they ate and sometimes they didn't. Their bodies simply switched over to burning stored fat when food wasn't available. And that's exactly what body fat is designed for. It's stored energy, and your body stores it so that you can use it later. And the problem is many of us have lost that ability. Instead of being metabolically flexible, we've become metabolically inflexible, and we rely almost exclusively on glucose as fuel, which means every time blood sugar begins to fall, our body immediately sends us another message that's like, go eat, I need food, I don't have enough energy. And we mistake that for an emergency. And that's where I was for many, many years. But often it's simply a sign that our body has forgotten how to efficiently access the fuel it's already carrying around. So what happens when metabolic health declines? Well, metabolic dysfunction doesn't happen overnight. No one wakes up one morning suddenly insulin resistant. It usually results from years or even decades of small habits that slowly push the body in the wrong direction. Think about our modern lifestyle and what it looks like today. We wake up and immediately we eat breakfast. Maybe we grab a flavored coffee on the way to work. We have a mid-morning snack, then we have lunch, something sweet after lunch, an afternoon snack because our energy is crashing at 3 p.m. Then we have dinner, we have dessert, and then we have a handful of chips while watching TV, maybe a little ice cream before bed. Many people are eating from 6 in the morning until 10 p.m. at night, and that means insulin is elevated for the majority of the day. Now, insulin in and of itself is not bad. We need it to survive. I want to make that very clear. It's an essential hormone, and without it, we will die. But its job is to move glucose from the bloodstream into our cells where it can either be used immediately for energy or stored later. And it's incredibly important. And the problem in and of itself isn't insulin. The problem is too much insulin for too much of the day for too many years. That is where we get into trouble. When insulin remains elevated day after day after day, year after year, our cells begin responding less efficiently and effectively. Imagine someone knocking on your front door. The first time you answer it immediately. But if someone is knocking every 5 minutes, or if your kids are saying your name every 5 minutes, another great example for the moms out there, eventually you stop responding. Your cells behave similarly. You're constantly being asked to respond to insulin. Over time, they become less sensitive to it. And this is what we call insulin resistance, which I know you've heard us talk about a lot on this show. When that happens, your pancreas has to produce even more insulin to get the job done. It's like having to yell louder because nobody's listening. My kids will sometimes find themselves in that situation, having to say, "Mom, Mom, Mom," louder, because I am really skilled at tuning things out. Ask my husband. Your body is working harder and harder just to keep your blood sugar looking normal. And here's where it gets so interesting is that many people don't know that this is happening because their annual blood work still comes back saying their glucose is, quote, normal. Their doctor says everything looks great. Meanwhile, their insulin has been climbing for years, and that's one reason I care so much about fasting insulin. It often tells us the story long before glucose starts telling us the story. So as insulin rises, several things begin to happen simultaneously. Your body becomes less efficient at burning stored fat. Blood sugar becomes more unstable. Energy becomes less consistent. Our cravings slowly increase. Food noise gets louder. Hunger becomes more frequent. Inflammation increases. Fat storage becomes easier. And eventually the body starts requiring more and more insulin simply to keep blood sugar under control. And this creates a vicious cycle. Higher insulin promotes more fat storage. More body fat worsens insulin resistance. Worsening insulin resistance requires more insulin. More insulin makes it even harder to access stored body fat. And around and around and around the cycle goes. And this is one of the reasons I don't like talking about obesity as though it's purely a calorie problem, because body fat is often a symptom of metabolic dysfunction, not necessarily the root cause. And that's a really important distinction. Imagine walking into your house and seeing water dripping from the ceiling. You spend all your day mopping the floor, and the floor might even look better for a while, but unless you fix the leaking pipe, the water is just going to keep coming back. And I think that's what we've done with weight loss. We have spent decades teaching people how to mop the floor, count calories, exercise, eat less, try harder, have more discipline. Meanwhile, we're ignoring the leaking pipe, the metabolic dysfunction, the elevated insulin, the unstable blood sugar, this dysregulated hunger hormones, because when you fix the pipe, you don't have to spend your entire life mopping the floor. The goal should never just be weight loss, and this is why I often tell my clients that I care far more about what's happening inside their body than what they see on the scale any particular week. Could someone lose 10 pounds by simply eating fewer calories? Absolutely. People do it all the time. But if they still have elevated insulin, poor blood sugar regulation, constant hunger, food obsession, no energy, and we're white knuckling our way through every single day, have we really made them healthier? I think that's a really valid question. I would argue that we haven't. In lifestyle school, the first win isn't seeing the scale move. The first win is hearing someone say, Hope, I'm just not hungry all the time anymore. Or I'm no longer thinking about food every hour of the day. Or I made it through the afternoon without a big energy crash. Or even something I forgot to eat lunch because I simply wasn't hungry. These are signs that the metabolism is changing. These are signs that insulin is improving. And they're also signs that the body is beginning to trust that it actually has access to fuel again. And when these things happen, weight loss often naturally flows, not because we become better at suffering, right? Or white knuckling it, not because we suddenly have more discipline, but because your body is finally working with you instead of against you. And now that we understand what metabolic health actually is, the next logical question becomes, how do you know whether your metabolism is healthy? Because the truth of the matter is that many people are metabolically unhealthy for years before they are ever diagnosed with something like type 2 diabetes. And thankfully, there are clues sitting in your annual blood work that can help us identify these problems long before they become disease. So now that we've defined metabolic health, the next question becomes, how do you know if your metabolism is healthy? Because here's what I find really interesting. Most people assume they would know if something was wrong. They think, well, if I don't have diabetes, my metabolism should be just fine. Or my doctor said my labs look normal, so I must be healthy. But here is the reality. Metabolic dysfunction doesn't usually happen overnight. It's a very slow process. And in fact, research suggests that insulin resistance can begin developing 10 to 20 years before someone is diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Sit with that. Think about that for a second. Your body can be compensating for years, even decades before blood sugar ever crosses the line into diabetes. And that's because your pancreas is incredibly hardworking. It's a little worker bee. Your cells become less responsive. I should say, as your cells become less responsive to insulin, your pancreas simply produces more of it. And for a while, that extra insulin is enough to keep your blood sugar looking perfectly normal. So your doctor checks your fasting glucose. It's normal. Your A1C looks normal. You leave your appointment thinking everything looks great. Meanwhile, your insulin has been quietly climbing year after year, and your body has been working harder and harder to maintain the illusion that everything is okay. And that's why I believe we have to look deeper than simply asking, do I have type 2 diabetes? Instead, we should be asking, how healthy is my metabolism? Bringing it back to that. And thankfully, we don't need thousands of dollars worth of specialty testing to answer that question. Most of that information is already sitting inside the routine lab work your primary care physician orders every year. The challenge isn't that we don't have the information. The challenge is that most people don't know what they're looking at. So let's walk you through the markers, and these are the ones I want you to pay close attention to. First, let's start with waist circumference, okay? Let's start with something that isn't even a lab test, which is your waist circumference. Now, before you roll your eyes and say, Hope, aren't you telling us not to be obsessed over our measurements? The answer is absolutely yes. But this measurement tells us something very different than the number on the scale. It gives us an estimate of visceral fat. Visceral fat is the fat that surrounds your organs inside of your abdomen. Unlike the fat just beneath your skin, visceral fat is metabolically active. It produces inflammatory compounds, it contributes to insulin resistance, and it increases the risk of things like heart disease, fatty liver disease, type 2 diabetes, and many other chronic illnesses. So generally speaking, it's a big deal, right? So when we're talking about waist circumference, generally speaking, these are the measurements you should look for. Women should aim for a waist circumference under 35 inches, and men should aim for one under 40 inches. Again, this isn't about chasing, a perfect body shape, a look. It's simply one clue that helps us understand what's happening in our body metabolically, and you can do it right there in your home. Next is blood pressure. Most people think blood pressure is only about heart health, but elevated blood pressure is one of the defining features of metabolic syndrome. And optimal blood pressure is, and I should say optimal, not optional, optimal blood pressure is generally considered to be less than 120/80. As insulin resistance develops, insulin doesn't just affect our blood sugar. It also affects your kidneys, your blood vessels, and your nervous system. Higher insulin levels encourages the kidneys to retain sodium and water, which increases blood volume and can contribute to higher blood pressure. Insulin resistance is also associated with changes in the blood vessels that make them less able to relax, further contributing to things like hypertension. So when I see someone with elevated blood pressure alongside excess abdominal weight, high triglycerides, elevated blood sugar, I'm not thinking about 4 separate problems. I'm thinking about one underlying issue, and that is metabolic syndrome, metabolic dysfunction. Next is fasting blood sugar. This is probably the lab people are most familiar with. After fasting overnight, your blood sugar is measured, and the medical ranges are normal if you're under 100 milligrams per deciliter. If you're between 100 to 125, that's considered pre-diabetic. And then if you're over 126, higher on 2 or more separate occasions, that is considered a red flag for type 2 diabetes. These cutoffs are useful for diagnosing disease, but remember what we just talked about, blood sugar is often the last thing to become abnormal. Your body's incredibly committed to keeping glucose within a narrow range because your brain depends on it. So if your glucose is still normal, that doesn't necessarily mean your metabolism is healthy. It simply means your pancreas is producing enough extra insulin to keep glucose under control. Think of it like a student who's barely passing a class because they're studying 6 hours every single night. If you looked at the grade, you'd think that everything was fine. But if you look behind the scenes, you'd realize how much effort it's taking to maintain that grade. And what's happening, and that's exactly what's happening with elevated insulin. The blood sugar looks okay, but the body's working overtime to keep it there. Another common test is hemoglobin A1C. I actually like this better than just like a fasting glucose. This gives us an average of your blood sugar over approximately the previous 3 months. Most medical providers would consider under 5.7% normal, anything between 5.7 and 6.4% pre-diabetic, and then above 6.5% or higher is type 2 diabetes. Inside of lifestyle school, I tend to like to see hemoglobin A1C closer to 5%, particularly for someone who's trying to improve their metabolic health. We don't want to just be barely not pre-diabetic, right? But because we're trying to identify dysfunction before it becomes disease, waiting until someone crosses that line into pre-diabetes is like waiting until your kitchen is on fire before installing a smoke detector. I'd rather notice the smoke early. And now let's talk about one of my favorite labs, and that is triglycerides. Triglycerides are a form of fat circulating in your bloodstream. And when you're constantly consuming carbohydrates, your body needs, I'm just not saying this sentence right. When you're constantly consuming more carbohydrates than your body needs, especially refined carbohydrates and added sugars, your liver can convert that excess into triglycerides. High triglycerides are one of the classic signs of insulin resistance. Many laboratories consider anything under 150 to be normal. Personally, I like to see triglycerides under 100 or even 80. One of the things I love about triglycerides is that they often improve fairly quickly when people begin eating more real whole foods, reducing refined carbohydrates, and increasing their activity and improving their insulin sensitivity. They're one of those labs that can be just really encouraging because you often see progress within a matter of months, which is always a nice moral, like a boost of morale when we're on this journey. HDL is often called the, quote, good cholesterol, although I think that's a gross oversimplification. Higher HDL levels are generally associated with better metabolic health. For women, we'd like to see HDL above 50. The higher, the better. For men, above 40. One thing I often look at is the relationship between triglycerides and HDL. When triglycerides are high and HDL is low, that's another clue that insulin resistance may be present. Again, it's about looking at the entire picture rather than focusing on one isolated number. And now to my favorite lab marker, and honestly, it's the one that I wish every primary care provider ordered routinely, and that is fasting insulin. If you've worked with me before, you've probably heard me say that fasting insulin is one of the most valuable tools we have for detecting metabolic dysfunction early. Why? Well, because insulin is often elevated years before blood sugar becomes abnormal. Remember the story of that hardworking pancreas that we told earlier? Fasting insulin tells us how hard your body's working to maintain a normal glucose level. The lower the insulin needed to keep blood sugar stable, the more insulin sensitive your body generally is. And inside lifestyle school, I generally like to see fasting insulin somewhere around 5 or below, recognizing that context matters and everyone's situation is a little different. And so to be real with you guys, I've seen clients with normal glucose, normal A1C, and fasting insulin, and have like a fasting insulin over 20 or even 30. And on paper, they look like they're like doing relatively okay, maybe not thriving, but metabolically their body is working incredibly hard. And you guys, I just looked this up the other day. If you can't get your primary care provider to do a fasting insulin blood test for you, you can go to your like a lab, like a Quest Labs, order it for yourself online, pay cash, and it's going to be probably around $60. What a steal to know if like this is something that's a huge issue for you as you're trying to lose weight and be your healthiest self. So when people though typically have high insulin, these individuals often describe the exact symptoms that we've been talking about. They're hungry all the time. They crave sugar. They can't go more than 3 hours without eating. They have an afternoon crash every day. They feel shaky if they skip a meal. And when we improve insulin sensitivity, those symptoms often improve long before dramatic weight loss occurs. And to me, that's incredibly exciting because it's evidence that we're fixing the underlying problem. Here's one final tool worth mentioning, although it's not commonly discussed in routine doctor's appointments, and it's called HOMA-IR, which stands for Homeostatic Model Assessment of Insulin Resistance. Don't worry, you guys, you don't need to memorize that. What's important is what it does. It combines your fasting glucose and fasting insulin to estimate how insulin resistant your body may be. Think of it as another way of putting the pieces of the puzzle together. Again, it's not perfect. It's not one single test, but it gives us some additional insight into what's happening beneath the surface. So now before we move on, I want to emphasize something important. No single lab determines whether or not you're healthy. Health isn't one number, it's a pattern. It's a story your body is telling. And that's why I never look at one lab in isolation. I want to look at all of them together. I want to see your waist circumference, your blood pressure, your fasting glucose, A1C, triglycerides, HDL, fasting insulin. I want to hear about your symptoms, your energy, your hunger, your sleep, your waistline, and your ability to go several hours without eating food, because they all tell parts of the same story. And when you start putting those pieces together, you can often identify metabolic dysfunction years before someone develops something like type 2 diabetes or other chronic diseases. And this is incredibly empowering because it means we don't have to wait until disease develops before we take action. We can improve our health while we're still on the front end of the problem. My old nutrition teacher used to always say it's easier to stay out of trouble than get out of trouble. And that leads us to a statistic that honestly shocked me. Like every time I hear it, it shocks me. And over the years, it's just gotten worse and worse. And that is just how metabolically healthy are Americans. And the answer is probably much worse than you think. Although if you've been listening to this podcast for any amount of time, you have probably heard me talk about this. So now we're talking about metabolic health and how it's measured. I want to zoom out for a second and look at the bigger picture, because if you're listening to this and thinking, well, maybe this doesn't apply to me, I want to share a statistic that should hopefully completely change the way that you think about health. So researchers have looked at the metabolic health of Americans by evaluating several different markers, things like blood sugar, blood pressure, cholesterol, triglycerides, waist circumference, and the absence of diseases like diabetes and heart disease. And what they have found was staggering. Only somewhere between 6.8 and 12% of American adults are considered metabolically healthy. Just think about that for a second. This means that roughly 9 out of every 10 adults have some degree of metabolic dysfunction. 9 out of 10. Let that sink in. Now, here's what's even more surprising. When most people hear this statistic, they're immediately like, picture obesity. And they assume metabolic dysfunction only affects people who are significantly overweight, but that's actually not true. There are many people walking around at a, quote, normal weight who are metabolically unhealthy. They have elevated insulin, poor blood sugar regulation, high triglycerides, fatty liver disease, high blood pressure, or chronic inflammation. And on the outside, they look healthy, but on the inside, their metabolism is struggling. And this is why I tell my clients all the time, weight and health are related, but they are not the same thing. The scale tells us how much you weigh. It doesn't tell us how healthy your metabolism is. You can lose 20 pounds and still have insulin resistance. Unfortunately, you can wear a size 4 and still have metabolic syndrome. You can also be carrying extra body fat while making tremendous improvements to your metabolic health. And that's why I don't want you to become obsessed with the scale. The scale is simply one piece of information. It's a tool. It's not the entire story. So how did we get here? Maybe you have some ideas. How did metabolic dysfunction become the norm instead of the exception? I don't think it's because people suddenly became lazy. I don't think it's because everyone lost their willpower or, just stopped caring. And I certainly don't think it's because people stopped caring about their health in general, right? I think it's because we've built an environment that makes metabolic dysfunction incredibly easy. Think about what the average day looks like for many Americans. We wake up and we eat immediately. Often it's something highly processed, and that's low in protein and fiber, high in refined carbohydrates. Maybe it's a bowl of cereal, a bagel, muffin, sugary coffee drink. Within a couple hours, our blood sugar begins to fall, and then what happens? We've all been there. We're hungry again. We grab a snack. Then we have lunch, a snack, a dinner, dessert, something while watching TV before bed. Many people eat 6, 7, or 8 times throughout the day, and this means insulin rarely gets a chance to come back down. Now add in things like poor sleep, stress, sedentary jobs, ultra-processed foods, constant access to food, late night eating, pesticides on all our food, then less muscle mass because so many people don't do resistance training, and the perfect recipe for metabolic dysfunction is right in front of us. And it's not because our bodies are inherently broken. It's because we're responding exactly the way we're designed to respond to the environment we've created. Remember what we talked about earlier? Your metabolism is always listening. Every meal sends a signal. Every snack sends a signal. Every night of poor sleep, every workout, every fast, all are sending signals, and your body is constantly gathering information and making adjustments based on those signals. Unfortunately, many of the signals we're sending today are telling our bodies to store energy, that food is constantly available. There's never a reason to access stored fat. And after years of hearing those messages, the body adapts. And this is one of the biggest mindset shifts, I hope you take away from today's episode, is that we often think that body fat is the problem, but many times body fat is actually the symptom of an unhealthy metabolism, not the cause of it. Imagine if you're driving down the road and your check engine light comes on, and you have two options. You can put a piece of black tape over the light so you don't have to look at it anymore, or you can be a responsible adult and you can open the hood and figure out what's going on underneath, or maybe take it to an auto shop if you're like me, to try to figure out what's causing this warning light to come on in the first place. And weight gain is often like a check engine light. It's your body's way of saying that something deeper may be going on. Maybe it's your insulin is elevated. Maybe it's your blood sugar isn't being well regulated. Maybe you're chronically sleep deprived. Stress hormones are running high. Or maybe your body has just become less efficient at accessing stored fat. The extra weight isn't always the problem. Sometimes it's the symptom that alerts us to the problem. And that's why I think so many traditional diets miss the mark. They're focused on almost entirely on making the warning light disappear, lose the weight, shrink the waistline, get the number on the scale lower. But these, and to be clear, these things aren't bad goals, but if we don't improve what's happening underneath the surface, we're simply treating the symptom without addressing the cause. And this is exactly why Lifestyle School starts where it does. We don't begin by asking, how many calories can we cut? We ask, how healthy is your metabolism? Because if we can improve the health of your metabolism, if we can lower insulin, improve insulin sensitivity, stabilize your blood sugar, reduce inflammation, increase muscle mass, improve your sleep, restore metabolic flexibility, then something amazing happens. Weight loss stops feeling like a constant fight. Instead of dragging your body toward health, your body begins moving in that direction with you and to me, that's the difference between dieting and healing. Dieting says, let's force your body to lose weight. The Lifestyle School says, let's create an environment where your body naturally wants to become healthier. And that doesn't mean weight loss happens overnight. It doesn't mean that there won't be challenges. But it does mean you no longer fight against your own physiology every single day. And that's exactly where we're headed next. Because once you understand how metabolic dysfunction develops, the next question becomes, Why does it make losing weight so incredibly difficult? And the answer has everything to do with one hormone that most people have heard of, but very few people truly understand, and that's insulin. So now that we've arrived at what I think is one of the most important questions of today's episode, why is it so hard to lose weight when your metabolism isn't healthy? Because if you've ever felt like you're doing everything right, you're eating less, you're trying to exercise, you're saying no to dessert, you're drinking the water, and the scale is barely moving or not moving at all, I want you to know something. This isn't something that you're imagining. Weight loss rarely is harder. Not rarely. Weight loss, it really is harder when your metabolism is unhealthy. It's not impossible, but harder. And the reason comes down to one hormone we've already mentioned several times today, and that is insulin. Now, I want to spend a few minutes talking about insulin because I think it's one of the most important hormones in the body when it comes to weight loss. Many people hear the word insulin and immediately think, oh, that's for the type 1 diabetics. But insulin isn't just important if you have diabetes. Every single day, we are depending on insulin. Without insulin, we wouldn't survive. So let's start with what insulin actually does. Every time you eat, especially foods that contain carbohydrates, your digestive system breaks those carbohydrates down into glucose. That glucose enters your bloodstream. Now imagine your bloodstream is like a highway. The glucose is traveling down the highway, but it doesn't belong there forever. Your muscles need it, your brain needs it, your organs need it, your cells need it. So your pancreas releases insulin. Think of insulin as a key. Its job is to unlock the doors of your cells so that glucose can move from your bloodstream into your tissues where it can be used for energy. It's an amazing system. It's beautifully designed. The problem isn't insulin. The problem is what happens when insulin stays elevated almost all the time. And here's the part that so many people don't realize is insulin doesn't just move glucose into your cells. It also tells your body what to do with energy. When insulin is elevated, your body is receiving the message, we have incoming fuel, store what we don't need. That makes perfect sense. If you just ate dinner, your body should use what it needs and store the rest for later. Some of that gets stored as glycogen in your muscles and liver. Some of it gets stored as body fat. And again, this isn't a bad thing. Body fat is not our enemy. Body fat is your body's emergency savings account. This is the way God designed us to store energy because food wasn't always guaranteed. Thousands of years ago, this system kept people alive. Today, food is available 24 hours a day, though, right? And that's where the problems begin. One of the simplest ways to understand metabolism is to realize your body is almost always in one of two states. It's either storing energy or using stored energy. After a meal, you're naturally in storage mode because insulin rises, your body stores nutrients. Several hours later, as insulin falls, your body should transition, though, into using stored energy. It should begin pulling glucose from glycogen stores, and then as those stores become empty, it should increasingly rely on stored fat. That's how the system is supposed to work. Store, use, back and forth throughout the day. That is metabolic flexibility. But what happens if insulin never really comes down is when we really start to have problems. What happens if we're constantly eating, constantly snacking, or drinking calories all day? The body spends less and less time accessing stored energy. It's always being told more fuel is coming, keep storing, no need to tap into the savings account. Eventually, your body becomes less efficient at accessing stored body fat that you already have stored. And I want you to picture something. Imagine you've been incredibly responsible with your money. I hope that's you. Excuse me. Imagine you've been incredibly responsible. Over the years, you've saved $50,000. It's sitting safely in your bank account. Then one day, your debit card stops working. Your online banking gets locked. The bank freezes your account. Technically, you're wealthy, right? You've got plenty of money, but practically speaking, you can't buy groceries, you can't pay your bills, you can't access what's already yours. And what would you do? You'd probably start borrowing money. You'd ask friends for help, you'd look for another source of cash, not because you don't have enough money, but because you can't access it. And that's what elevated insulin does. If you have 50, 70, even 100 pounds of stored body fat, or even 10 pounds, That's tens of thousands of calories, but your body struggles to access them efficiently. So instead, your brain sends another message: go eat. We need food. We need sustenance. That's why someone can have a tremendous amount of stored energy and still feel hungry every few hours. It's one of the great paradoxes of obesity. People assume if I have excess body fat, why am I always hungry? Because hunger isn't determined by how much fat you have. It's influenced by whether your body can actually use that fat. Imagine trying to ignore those hunger signals day after day. You're trying to eat fewer calories, but your body is saying, I need energy. You're trying to skip the snack, but your brain is saying, find food. I don't know if your brain has done that to you. It's done it to me, and it is awful. You're trying to ignore the cravings. Your body is increasing the volume. And this is why I dislike the phrase, like, just have more willpower, have more discipline, because biology at the end of the day pretty much always wins. You might be able to overpower your physiology for a week or maybe even a month, but eventually your body starts turning up the volume. Hunger becomes stronger, cravings become louder, food becomes even more rewarding, energy drops, our motivation fades, not because there's anything wrong with us, but because our body is trying to protect you. And I think this is one of the most compassionate ways to think about the human body. Your body isn't trying to sabotage you. It's trying to keep you alive. Remember, your body has no idea you're trying to fit into a smaller pair of jeans before your vacation. It doesn't know you're trying to lose 30 pounds before your daughter's wedding. It doesn't know your New Year's resolution. It's simply receiving signals. It senses that unstable energy is becoming scarce. It responds the only way it knows how to. It increases hunger. It reduces energy expenditure. It encourages food-seeking behavior. It conserves energy. And these aren't any flaws. These are survival mechanisms. And the problem is that we're being activated into an environment where many people have plenty of stored body fat but can't efficiently access it. Now let's add blood sugar to this picture. When blood sugar is constantly rising and falling dramatically throughout the day, it creates an energy roller coaster. You eat something high in refined carbohydrates, blood sugar spikes, insulin spikes, blood sugar then falls rapidly, and suddenly you feel tired, maybe shaky, irritable. You find yourself reaching for another snack, not necessarily because your body truly needs more calories, but because your blood sugar has become unstable. One of the first things many of my clients notice when they begin improving their metabolic health isn't actually weight loss. They'll say things like, Hope, I don't have my usual energy crash today, or I realized I went 5 hours without thinking about food, or I actually forgot to eat lunch today because I simply wasn't hungry. To me, these are incredible victories because they tell me that something deeper is changing. Blood sugar is becoming more stable, insulin is improving, and the body is beginning to trust that it has excess stored fuel again. And this is a really big deal. Now, hopefully you can see why I don't start my clients by saying, like, let's see how few calories we can get you to survive on. Instead, I ask, why are you hungry? Why are your cravings so intense? Why does your energy crash every afternoon? Why can't you comfortably go 4 or 5 hours without eating? Because if we can answer those questions, if we can lower insulin, improve insulin sensitivity, stabilize blood sugar, and teach the body to access stored fat again, then we've removed one of the biggest barriers to successful weight loss. And that's why I say over and over again, the first goal isn't weight loss. The first goal is restoring metabolic health, because once your body remembers how to burn its stored fuel, we're no longer fighting ourselves every single day. And that's exactly where the next piece of the puzzle comes into, because insulin isn't the only thing changing. There are several other hormones that influence whether or not you feel hungry, satisfied, energized, or are constantly thinking about food. And so I am running out of time for today's episode. I put too much content in here together. So next week, we're going to talk about hormones and how they control your appetite. And so let me just scroll through. And next week, I'm going to do a part 2 of this. We're going to kind of put together, like, what are the pillars for restoring metabolic health? Because I think this is really, really important. So I want to leave you with this thought today, though. If you've spent years believing that you simply need more willpower, I hope today's episode gave you a different perspective. Maybe you don't need to try harder. maybe you need to stop fighting your body. Maybe you need to start understanding it, because your body is incredibly intelligent. It's constantly adapting to the environment you create. And the beautiful thing is you can create a different environment. One meal at a time, one walk at a time, one workout at a time, one night of good sleep at a time, one fast at a time. These small decisions don't just change the number on the scale, they change our metabolism. And truly, when your metabolism changes, everything becomes easier. Your hunger changes, your energy, your relationship with food begins to change for the better. And yes, eventually your weight changes too. So the next time you find yourself thinking, I just need to lose weight, I want you to replace that thought with this one. I want to build a healthier metabolism, because that is the real goal at the end of the day. The weight loss is simply one of the most wonderful things that happens along the way. So with that, you guys, thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I truly hope this episode helped you understand your body a little bit better and gave you hope that weight loss doesn't have to be about fighting yourself harder or like finding more willpower or discipline within yourself. It can be about working smarter. If this episode encouraged you, I would love for you to share it with a friend or family member who has been stuck in this cycle of dieting and wondering why it never seems to last. And if you're enjoying the Lifestyle School podcast, it would mean so much to me if you'd leave a rating or review. And if it helps, because if you do that, it helps more people find this conversation and join us on a journey towards better metabolic health. So until next time, you guys, I want you to remember your body isn't broken. It's responding to the signals it's been given. Start changing the signals, and over time, your body will begin to change too. With that, guys, we'll see you next week on the Lifestyle School podcast.